with heavy hearts. As you know, we lost one of our own, and we stay committed to making sure that we conduct a very thorough investigation to get all the answers for Tara's family, all of her loved ones, and for our Sacramento Police Department family as well. Tonight we do have an update, and with me this evening will be Chief Hahn, Deputy Chief Ken Bernard, and our Assistant City Manager, Chris Conlon. As we start this update, we do want to show a video, and this video is a small clip of a body-worn camera at the scene during the shooting.
There's a lot of shit in that back right. Hey, Adele Police Department. Adele Police Department, you're not under arrest, you're not in trouble. Adele Police Department, if you're in here, let me know. You're not in trouble, dude. This is a high-powered rifle. Get out here now. Cover, we got one down. Code 3 fire. Move him in. Officer down, officer down. Code 3 fire. High-powered rifle.
Copy, officer down, starting fire. Where at?
Redwood. Who's in front of this boat right here? Get back here. Where are you at?
I'm in between all this shit.
Oh, shit.
Got you at Redwood.
Stay down. Hey, hey. Yeah, he's still shooting. He's talking. Changing clips, he's changing clips. Get out.
Get out of here, get out of here!
Go, back out. He's in front of the boat. Move. Get out. Get up, go.
And at this time, I'll bring up Chief Hahn to provide a few more details.
So understand this is an ongoing investigation, and there's a lot more work to be done to gather all the facts. As we've always stated, we put out facts on critical incidents as we gather them. We will continue to process the scene, and we'll have a process at the location on Redwood at least through the weekend. As you just had a glimpse into what the officers faced on this day through that video clip, a couple things are clear by the facts that we know at this point. The officers were essentially ambushed by the suspect, and the result was him murdering one of our community's police officers. Throughout much of this incident, from the first time the suspect shot at our officers, murdering Officer Sullivan at 6:10 p.m., he continued to fire at officers for over 4 hours. He typically shot rounds at officers every time he observed any sort of movement. He fired at the armored cars and officers multiple times. We want to make sure we provide our community the facts as we obtain them and confirm them. There's a lot of speculation about this incident and many aspects of this incident, so I'd like to address some of those at this time. It is clear by the suspect's action that he was intent on murdering additional officers and was taking action to do just that, repeatedly shooting at officers throughout much of this incident. We now know that he had multiple weapons in multiple buildings on the property, both handgun and rifles, along with numerous rounds of ammunition. Due to the fact that the officers believed they were being shot at with a high-powered rifle, they had officers retrieve our armored vehicle. I truly believe if officers utilized the equipment they had at the time, prior to retrieving the armored vehicle, we would have additional officers murdered on that day. If officers utilized the squad car with ballistic doors, this protection does not protect against high-powered rifle rounds. Those officers would have surely been killed. If officers utilized their bulletproof vests or their handheld ballistic shields, they would have been killed. These pieces of equipment do not protect against high-powered rifle rounds. This was an ambush-style attack on Sacramento police officers that lasted for hours. Under the most dangerous and trying circumstances, our officers performed admirably. The best proof we have that this is the case is by knowing no additional officers were killed by the suspect and no community members were injured or killed by the suspect. With the facts as we know them today, that is amazing because the suspect was truly intent on harming additional people. I'm extremely proud of how our officers served our community that afternoon and how they served each other. This was a horrific day for this police department and, frankly, for our entire community. We lost an amazing person and a bright light for our entire community. A family lost a daughter, a sister. This will have an effect on Tara's family and friends, this department, the officers involved, and our community for the rest of our lives. But our officers, they will get up tomorrow. Our officers will come to work and they will serve this community. They will help the next person in need that calls for our assistance, all while knowing what happened Wednesday afternoon. I ask this community to lift up the Sullivan family now and moving forward because they have paid the ultimate sacrifice for all of us. The family needs our love and support right now. I will now turn it back over to Sergeant Chandler to give some of the specifics on this incident.
Okay, our initial information that we put out was that our officers were assisting a female who was gathering belongings at this address in the 200 block of Redwood Avenue. And what we know, I'll provide a photo of the scene. This photo here is the scene where this took place. The address where the officers responded to was this location in the 200 block of Redwood Avenue. This is the front house. This is a detached garage. This is the primary street, Redwood Avenue. And this is an alley that is behind the primary house. When the officers went to the residence to help the female gather belongings, they also learned some preliminary information about the male half, including that he had a misdemeanor warrant for an assault from a previous incident, not from this incident. When they went to knock at the front door of this residence, there was no answer, and they noticed that the front door was barricaded. And I'll show you a picture of that front door from the interior that we gathered later. This is the front door of that residence that was barricaded. Back to the area. The officers also knew that the suspect had a connection to the house that is just east of the primary house. They went in there to attempt to make contact with him and also gather some belongings of the female. After that, they also learned that the female wanted some personal belongings from the detached garage. And inside of this residence, they located 2 firearms that they learned belonged to the suspect. Based on that information, there were originally only 2 officers that were on this call. After learning about this suspect having 2 firearms in this residence and potentially having access to more firearms, the officers asked for additional officers to respond and help due to the potential of the suspect having additional firearms. In addition to the 2 officers, 3 additional officers responded to help as they developed a plan to go knock on the door of this detached garage, because they had already knocked here and they knew that the front door was barricaded, and the female that they were helping wanted some belongings from this detached garage. The officers developed a plan as they were in the neighboring residence yard, and they developed a plan. And the video that you observed was body-worn camera video of an officer who was the primary officer going to make contact in this detached garage. That officer had 4 additional officers with him, including Tara. And as you saw in the video, the officer knocked, announced his presence, went inside that detached garage, and that's when the officers were ambushed. And that's when Tara was struck by gunfire. Suspect being armed with a rifle. Officers established a perimeter while waiting for an armored vehicle. As Chief Hahn indicated earlier, the officers believed the suspect was armed with a rifle. Due to that, they requested an armored vehicle. You heard the gunshots by the suspect. The suspect continuously fired from a high-powered rifle. Fortunately, we recently developed a new plan for gathering special equipment, including the armored vehicle. And fortunately, that plan came into place here because we had a patrol officer who was recently trained and able to deploy in the armored vehicle. That patrol officer, who was working in a patrol capacity, responded to our police station at 300 Richards Boulevard, and he got the armored vehicle. The request was made at 6:13, and the officer was at the police station at 6:15 and got the armored vehicle. And at 6:22, after loading up the armored vehicle, he left the police station and responded to the scene with lights and sirens. The officer arrived at approximately 6:27 p.m. with the armored vehicle and coordinated with the officers on scene who had established a perimeter around the primary house. And at that time, they believed the suspect was in this front house, and they continued to hear gunfire coming from the suspect. Per officers on scene, during that time frame, the suspect fired his weapon during this time frame: 6:10 p.m., 6:11 p.m., 6:12 p.m., 6:15 p.m., 6:17 p.m., 6:18 p.m., 6:19 p.m., 6:29 p.m., 6:46 p.m., 6:47 p.m., 6:49 p.m., 6:53 p.m. There were more that continued throughout the incident, all the way up until 10:29 p.m. Overall, throughout the entirety of this incident, the suspect fired at least 30 different times. As that officer arrived with the Bearcat, which is the name of our armored vehicle, you can see the Bearcat right here. That is our armored vehicle. They developed a plan to come through the alley because Tara, she was injured and down in the backyard of this residence, roughly in this area. The officers had to navigate through many different obstacles to get to the backyard, including a pole, a chain link fence, a wood fence. They developed a very safe plan to utilize the Bearcat, the armored vehicle, to safely rescue Tara because they were continuously being fired at by the suspect who they believed was armed with a rifle. They navigated the Bearcat by breaching the rear fence. As they breached the rear fence, the suspect continued to fire at the Bearcat, and the Bearcat was struck by gunfire multiple times. As they entered the backyard, they had to navigate through other items in the backyard, and as they continued to move, the suspect continued to fire at the Bearcat. As they got within close proximity of Tara, one officer exited the Bearcat and returned fire at the suspect, while multiple other officers rescued Tara. At that point, they placed her in the armored vehicle as the suspect continued to fire at the Bearcat. After placing her in the vehicle, they backed out. As they backed out, the suspect continued to fire at the Bearcat. As they backed out, the Bearcat became disabled, and that's where it became disabled. And that's when multiple officers carried Tara out of the area to a patrol vehicle and transported her to a hospital. As she was being transported to a hospital, we know that a CHP officer was rendering aid, and that CHP officer has extensive medical training, including being a first aid trainer for his department, an EMT, a combat medic, a licensed practical nurse in the military. We're very thankful for that CHP officer. After the rescue was complete and the officers transported Tara to the hospital, the suspect continued to fire throughout the incident. Like I said earlier, a total of over 30 times throughout the night until 10:29 p.m. Our officers maintained their perimeter. At approximately 9:38 p.m., our crisis negotiators attempted to make contact with him. And after numerous attempts, finally at 10:40 p.m., they were able to establish contact with him. After at least 2 hours of negotiating, our negotiators diligently worked to him surrendering peacefully, which he did. And he was taken into custody at approximately 1:54 p.m. He was not injured. We have since been doing a very extensive investigation. As you can imagine, the crime scene is very, very large. We have been processing the scene. Since we have been processing that scene, there's still a lot of information that we are still gathering. But some of the information that we have right now includes some very pertinent evidence. And I'll show you some of the photos that we have of that evidence. Inside the primary house where the suspect was, we've located 4 weapons: 2 assault rifles, 1 handgun, and 1 shotgun. Our investigators have determined that the suspect used all 4 of those weapons during this incident. Our investigators have also determined that there are casings throughout this residence from this incident. Additionally, these 4 weapons were placed strategically throughout the house. This is one of the assault rifles that was inside the house. This is another assault rifle that was inside the house. This is the shotgun and handgun that was inside the house. All 4 of those weapons were used by the suspect. Like I said earlier, there were multiple casings throughout the entire house, and our investigators have determined that all 4 were used by the suspect. Go back to the Additionally, during their investigation, investigators have also located 2 additional firearms that were located in the detached garage where the officers attempted to make entry in the video that you observed. We know that our investigators will continue to process the scene, and we do expect them to be out there through the weekend. We do know that our officers during this incident fired at least 100 rounds at the suspect, and we continue to gather additional evidence and process the scene. So that information is still pending on a total round count. At this point, we do not have a total round count that the suspect fired, but we do know that he used all 4 weapons that we recovered inside the house, including 2 assault rifles, 1 shotgun, 1 handgun, and there were casings that were located throughout the entire house. And all 4 of those weapons were placed strategically. With that, we will field some questions.
The attempted murder charges that were just filed, was that the officer we saw in the video, or could you give us some background on that and where that officer was?
Yes, the body-worn camera that you observed, he's the victim as well. It's an attempt murder on that officer.
What was the relationship between the suspect and the woman who officers were attempting to help, and then the properties themselves? Were 3 different buildings at least, and 2 properties?
So we want to make sure that we do not compromise the investigation, and they are working diligently to find all of those answers. We do know that the suspect and the female did know each other, and we do know that they had some sort of relationship, and they had some sort of incident prior to this evening, and that's why we got the initial call. As we indicated earlier in the initial information we gave out, that they had some sort of disturbance. The exact details of that disturbance, we are still conducting follow-up regarding that disturbance in the relationship. The houses involved, we knew that this was the primary house of the suspect,